The history of the clinic. In February of 1921, 4 Cleveland physicians founded Cleveland Clinic. The name of these 4 physicians were George Washington Cryle, Frank Bunce, William Lower, and John Phillips. Three of the 4 physicians, George Washington Cryle, Frank Bunce, and William Lower, were surgeons who had worked together during World War I. Upon their return at the war's end, their plan was to found a hospital or medical center. The fire starts. On May 15, 1929, shortly after 11 a.m., Buffy Boggs, a W.R. Roten employee, had been called in by the clinic to fix a leaking steam pipe. As he was fixing the pipe, he noticed sparks fall from a light bulb, which led to a fire starting. He then called out to a clinic maintenance worker to bring a fire extinguisher because of the fire. Buffy Boggs later stated, "I emptied a full fire extinguisher into the fire, and it simply did nothing." He soon found himself engulfed in smoke. In his efforts to crawl his way out of the basement, a first blast occurred, sending him flying across the room. This blast occurred at 11:25 a.m. By this time, many of the victims were dead or almost dead from smoke inhalation. The Cleveland Fire Department received its first notification at around 11:30 a.m. At arrival, they found the entrance to the building and upper floors of the building almost impossible to navigate because of the toxic smoke. Fire investigators later found that the film room's rear elevator and stairwell were being burned by the fire, as well as 6 more fires burning in other parts of the building. Still, the gas was the greatest threat. As the firefighters attempted to enter the building, a second explosion occurred. This explosion blew out the building's skylight and all of its windows. This allowed the firemen to see some of the victims. The firefighters immediately got onto the roof and entered through the broken skylight. The firefighters saved as many as they could through the broken skylight. Later, fire investigators found nitrocellulose, a highly flammable chemical used in gun cotton, at the scene of the fire. Gun cotton is an explosive that is used in guns and in rockets. 250 people were in the building at the time of the fire, and before the fire had finished, 120 people had lost their lives. 123 people were killed in total when the fire had completely finished, including one of its founders, Dr. John Phillips. The fire was started when an X-ray film made with nitrocellulose was left under a 100-watt light bulb in the basement for an extended amount of time leading up to the fire. 4,200 pounds of X-ray films were burned, releasing enough poisonous gas to cover 3.5 miles. The films were supposed to be held in metal tubes meant for X-ray storage, but instead were held in wooden cabinets. The yellow gas that was released from the X-ray films killed most of the people in the building at the time, along with a few others after the fire. The clinic was made of reinforced brick and concrete and was considered fireproof. The National Fire Protection Association said 2 weeks after the fire, "This furnishes proof that no building is truly fireproof." Short-term effects. Shortly after the fire, people were still feeling the effects of the disastrous event. Some 50 people were taken to nearby hospitals for gas treatment. Some people were becoming very ill, which later led to 3 of the victims dying from the yellowish gas which they had inhaled during the fire. Much of the clinic was burned, and a lot of research and information was lost in the fire. Long-term effects. The long-term effects were that nitrocellulose-based films were deemed no longer safe to use for the NFPA. The inspection rules were made more harsh to stop a disaster like this from happening ever again. The National Fire Department started to train firemen differently after the fire. The firemen were also provided gas masks as part of their equipment. After the clinic had been rebuilt, they were much safer by using a newer and safer acetate-based Kodak film, which was said to be no deadlier than a piece of paper. The triumph. The disaster was responsible for influencing significant changes to firefighting techniques. The city of Cleveland issued gas masks to its fire departments and suggested a city ambulance service. Nationally, the disaster prompted medical facilities to establish standards for the storage of nitrocellulose film and other hazardous materials to prevent another disaster like this one. The tragedy. 123 people died the day of the Cleveland Clinic fire, and some had to suffer the rest of their lives with problems from the smoke inhalation. Most of the clinic was burned, and important information and research was lost the day of the fire. Thesis statement. The Cleveland Clinic fire of 1929 was a triumph as well as a tragedy because now no disasters like the Cleveland Clinic fire will ever happen again. This is because we now know to be safe with highly flammable things. The inspection rules are better to make sure people don't get hurt. The Cleveland Clinic fire of 1929 was a tragedy because it killed 123 people, left 92 people injured, and exploded the Cleveland Clinic.